Chapter 1. The no-teth rain fell like a whispered curse over the narrow streets of Ashenmore, turning cobblestones to mirrors, and washing the night in shades of bruised plum and charcoal. Eleanor Thorne moved through the downpour with practiced efficiency, her apron soaked through, her hair plastered to her neck. The Iron Lily Tavern sat at the edge of the old district, where crumbling Gothic spires met the sprawl of the living city, a threshold between worlds most people pretended not to notice. She was good at pretending, good at keeping her head down, her voice soft, her past buried under layers of quiet competence. 6 months ago, she'd fled her former life, a broken engagement, a family scandal that left her name whispered with pity and contempt, and found refuge in this liminal place. The tavern catered to a particular clientele, those who moved through shadows, who paid in old coins, who never ate the food they ordered. Eleanor had learned not to ask questions. Tonight, the main hall was nearly empty. A few cloaked figures occupied corner tables, speaking in low voices that didn't quite reach her ears. The air smelled of candle wax, aged wine, and something else, something metallic and ancient that made her skin prickle. She moved between tables, collecting glasses, wiping surfaces. Invisible. Then he walked in. Eleanor felt him before she saw him, a shift in atmospheric pressure, a sudden weight that made her lungs work harder. She glanced up and immediately wished she hadn't. He was tall, impossibly so, with shoulders that filled the doorframe and a presence that seemed to consume oxygen. His coat was black, expensive, tailored to emphasize the predatory grace in his movements. Dark hair fell to his collar, damp from rain, but it was his face that stopped her breath, sharp cheekbones, a mouth carved for cruelty or kissing, she couldn't decide which, and eyes the color of winter storms, pale gray and utterly cold. Those eyes swept the room with calculated precision, dismissing the other patrons, then landing on her. Eleanor's heart stumbled. She looked away quickly, busying herself with a tray of empty glasses, but her hands trembled. She knew what he was. Everyone in Ashenmore knew the markers, the preternatural stillness, the way light seemed to avoid them, the sense that death walked in a well-cut suit. Vampire. Not just any vampire. The sigil ring on his hand, a crescent moon crossed by a sword, marked him as House Sylvain, the ruling house, the most powerful, most feared of the immortal bloodlines that governed the Night Court. And if the rumors were true, this was Lucien Sylvain himself, the Vampire King. Eleanor forced herself to breathe normally as he took a seat at the bar, his movements fluid and utterly silent. The tavern owner, Marcus, appeared from the back room, his weathered face carefully neutral. He poured a glass of dark wine without being asked, set it before Lucien with a small bow, then retreated. Smart man. Eleanor tried to continue her work, clearing tables on the opposite side of the room, but she felt those pale eyes tracking her, watching, assessing. She'd heard stories about House Sylvain, about their cold strategic minds, their brutal enforcement of vampire law, their complete lack of mercy for those who betrayed them. She was just reaching for another glass when she noticed it, a folded piece of paper, tucked beneath the candle holder on a recently vacated table. The couple who'd been sitting there, a woman in a crimson cloak and a man with house markings she didn't recognize, had left moments before Lucien arrived. Too quickly, too deliberately. Eleanor's instincts, honed by months of survival, screamed at her to ignore it, to walk away, to pretend she'd seen nothing. But her fingers moved before her mind could stop them. She palmed the note, tucking it against her wrist as she gathered the remaining glasses. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she approached the bar, every step feeling like walking toward a cliff edge. Lucien didn't look up as she drew near. He sat utterly still, one hand resting on the stem of his wine glass, the other relaxed on the bar top. Yet she sensed the coiled violence in him, the kind of predatory awareness that missed nothing. Eleanor set down her tray. Her mouth was dry as desert sand. Your wine, sir. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. And something else. Now he looked at her. The full weight of his attention was crushing. Those winter storm eyes held no warmth, no humanity, only ancient, terrible intelligence. She saw power there, and loneliness, and something that might have been weariness buried so deep it had fossilized. Eleanor placed the note on the bar between them, her hand shaking only slightly. For a long moment, Lucien didn't move. Then his gaze dropped to the folded paper. One elegant finger reached out, unfolded it with deliberate care. She watched his expression, what little existed, shift. A muscle tightened in his jaw. His grip on the wine glass increased until she heard the crystal begin to crack. When he looked up again, his eyes had gone completely black. "Where did you get this?" His voice was velvet over steel, soft and absolutely lethal. "The couple who just left," Eleanor whispered. "The woman in red. They were sitting by the window. They left right before you arrived." Lucien rose in a single fluid motion, his full height towering over her. The temperature around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. "What did they look like?" Eleanor described them quickly: the woman's auburn hair, the man's house markings, their hurried departure. As she spoke, she glimpsed the note's contents, written in hasty script. "Your fiancé sold you out. House Morwen knows your route. They're in position, 3 blocks east. Tonight, get your coat," Lucien said suddenly, his voice sharp with command. Eleanor blinked. "What? Your coat?" Now, he was already moving toward the door, his hand inside his coat, where she glimpsed the hilt of something, a blade, ornate and deadly. "You've just painted a target on your back by giving me this. House Morwen will assume you're an informant. If you stay here, you're dead within the hour." Terror flooded her veins, cold and electric. I'm not move." The single word cracked like a whip. Eleanor moved. She grabbed her thin coat from the hook by the kitchen, her mind spinning. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. She was nobody, nothing, just a waitress trying to disappear into obscurity. But as she followed Lucien Sylvain into the rain-soaked night, the Gothic spires of Ashenmoor, looming like teeth against storm clouds, she realized her quiet life had just shattered, and the vampire who should be her death might be her only chance at survival. Chapter 2, Sanctuary and Shadows. The carriage that waited in the alley was black as sin and utterly silent. No horses pulled it. Instead, it moved by some mechanism Eleanor couldn't see, gliding over wet cobblestones with unnatural smoothness. Lucien pulled open the door with one hand, his other still inside his coat, fingers wrapped around that hidden blade. "Inside," he commanded. Eleanor hesitated at the threshold, rain streaming down her face, every instinct screaming conflicting warnings. Behind them, she heard footsteps, multiple sets, moving with coordinated precision through the narrow streets. Not running, hunting. Lucien's hand closed around her wrist, and he pulled her into the carriage with inhuman strength. The door slammed shut. The vehicle lurched forward immediately, accelerating to impossible speeds. Eleanor fell against the velvet seat, gasping. The interior was all dark wood and burgundy cushions, lit by a single oil lamp that cast dancing shadows across Lucien's sharp features. He sat across from her, utterly still except for his eyes, which tracked something outside the tinted windows. "They're following," he said quietly. 3 riders. House Morwen's Hunter Division. "I don't understand." Eleanor's voice broke on the words. "I just gave you a note." "Why would they?" "Because House Morwen operates on the assumption that witnesses are liabilities." Lucien's gaze shifted to her, and she saw calculation there, cold assessment. "They'll assume you read the note, that you know their plans. They can't afford to let you talk." "But I don't know anything. I barely glanced at it." "Irrelevant." He leaned forward slightly, and she caught the scent of him, rain and cedar and something darker, older. In vampire politics, perception is reality. You're a loose thread. They'll cut you. The carriage took a sharp turn, and Eleanor gripped the edge of her seat. Through the window, she glimpsed the city blurring past Gothic architecture giving way to older structures. Buildings that predated Ashenmoor's founding. Places where street lamps didn't reach. "Where are we going?" "The only place in this city House Morwen can't easily breach." Lucien's expression remained unreadable. "My residence." Eleanor's stomach dropped. You're taking me to your home? Would you prefer I leave you in an alley for Morwen's hunters?" His tone was dry, almost mocking. "I assure you, they're far less civilized than I am." Before she could respond, something struck the carriage roof with a heavy thud. Eleanor screamed. Lucien moved faster than her eyes could follow, drawing his blade, a rapier with a guard shaped like crescent moons, and positioning himself between her and the ceiling. "Stay down," he ordered. Another impact, this time hard enough to dent the roof inward. Eleanor heard voices above them, sharp commands in a language she didn't recognize. The carriage swerved violently, and then they were airborne for a heartbeat before crashing back to earth. Lucien braced himself against the wall, completely steady despite the chaos. "They're trying to force us to stop." Predictable. He tapped the wall twice with the hilt of his rapier, and the carriage somehow accelerated further. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. "What happens if they catch us?" They won't. It wasn't arrogance in his voice, just absolute certainty. The pursuit lasted another 3 minutes that felt like hours. Then the carriage plunged into darkness, so complete Eleanor thought they'd gone underground. When light returned, they were moving through an entirely different landscape, a private road lined with ancient oak trees, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sky. The sounds of pursuit had vanished. Lucian sheathed his blade with a soft click. We've crossed into Sylvain territory. They won't follow here. Even House Morwen isn't that foolish. Eleanor sagged against the seat, adrenaline draining from her limbs and leaving her shaking. She'd never been this frightened in her life, not even when her former fiancé's betrayal had been exposed. Not even when her family had turned their backs on her. The carriage rolled to a gentle stop. Lucian opened the door and stepped out with fluid grace, then extended a hand to her. Eleanor stared at that pale hand, elegant, long-fingered, utterly inhuman in its perfection. She thought of all the stories she'd heard about vampires, about what happened to mortals who entered their domains, but the alternative was death in an alley. She took his hand. His skin was cool but not cold, his grip firm as he helped her down. Eleanor found herself standing before a structure that stole her breath, a Gothic manor that seemed to grow from the landscape itself. All soaring spires and mullioned windows, built from dark stone that gleamed wetly in the rain. Gargoyles perched along the roofline, their expressions frozen in eternal warning. Welcome to Sylvain House, Lucian said quietly. You'll be safe here. For now. He led her up wide stone steps to massive double doors that opened silently at their approach. Inside, the entrance hall was vast and shadowed, lit by candles and iron sconces. The floor was black marble veined with silver. Portraits lined the walls, pale faces with knowing eyes, centuries of Sylvain ancestors watching. Eleanor's wet shoes squeaked against the marble. She felt impossibly small, impossibly out of place. This way. Lucian moved deeper into the house, and she followed because she had no other choice. They passed through corridors lined with ancient tapestries and weapons displayed like art. Everything spoke of age, power, bloodlines that stretched back before recorded history. Finally, he stopped before a heavy wooden door and pushed it open. Guest quarters. There's a bathroom through there, clothes in the wardrobe, and a lock on the inside of the door, if it makes you feel safer. His mouth curved in something that might have been amusement. Though I assure you, if I wanted you dead, a lock wouldn't stop me. Eleanor stepped into the room. It was larger than her entire apartment, furnished with antiques and dominated by a 4-poster bed draped in dark velvet. A fire burned in the hearth, though she hadn't seen anyone light it. She turned to face him, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. Why are you helping me? Lucian stood in the doorway, backlit by candlelight, his expression unreadable. You warned me about an ambush. That deserves protection at minimum. And, he paused, something flickering across his features too quickly to identify. You didn't have to give me that note. You could have left it on the table, walked away, stayed invisible. But you didn't. I couldn't just. Most can. His voice was soft now, almost sad. Most do. Rest, Eleanor Thorne. We'll discuss what happens next in the evening. He knew her name. She'd never told him her name. Before she could ask, he closed the door, leaving her alone in gilded captivity, with questions burning through her mind and the sound of rain against ancient windows. Chapter 3. In human habits, Eleanor didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the enormous bed, still wearing her damp clothes, watching firelight play across unfamiliar walls. The room was beautiful in a cold, preserved way, like a museum exhibit of how nobility once lived. Every piece of furniture was an antique, every fabric rich and heavy. But there were no personal touches, no signs anyone had actually inhabited this space in decades. It felt like a beautiful tomb. As dawn approached, exhaustion finally pulled her under. She woke to find afternoon light filtering through heavy curtains, turning the room amber and gold. Someone had left a tray on the table near the fire, tea in a silver pot, still hot, and fresh bread with butter and jam. Eleanor stared at it, her stomach growling despite her unease. Who had brought it? She'd locked the door. She was certain she'd locked the door. She ate anyway, because survival demanded it, and the food was better than anything she'd tasted in months. As she finished, she noticed the wardrobe door standing slightly ajar. Inside hung several dresses in dark jewel tones, emerald, sapphire, deep burgundy, all in her size. Perfectly her size. The implications made her skin crawl. Eleanor changed into a simple black dress, finding it fit like it had been tailored for her body. She braided her dark hair, splashed water on her face from the porcelain basin, and tried to gather her courage. She needed answers. Needed to understand what she'd stumbled into, what Lucien expected from her, how long she'd be trapped here. The manor was silent as she stepped into the corridor. No servants bustled past, no sounds of life echoed through the halls. Just silence, thick and watchful. Eleanor moved carefully, trailing her fingers along the wall, following the path they'd taken last night in reverse. She passed rooms with doors standing open, a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves, a music room with a piano covered in dust, a gallery filled with paintings of people who all shared Lucien's sharp cheekbones and pale eyes. Family, generations of them, frozen in oil and time. In one portrait, she found Lucien himself younger somehow, though his face held the same ageless quality. He stood beside a woman in a white gown, her hand resting on his arm. The painted Lucien almost smiled. Almost. That was painted in 1847. Eleanor spun around, heart leaping into her throat. Lucien stood in the corridor behind her, utterly silent in his approach. He wore different clothes now, a simple white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, dark trousers, no coat. It should have made him seem more human. Instead, it only emphasized the inhuman grace of his movements, the predatory stillness he carried like a second skin. The woman was Lady Catherine Morwen, he continued, moving closer. Before our houses went to war, your fiancé, Eleanor whispered, remembering the note. The one who betrayed you. Something flickered in those winter gray eyes, pain, maybe, or rage buried so deep it had calcified. Former fiancé. The engagement was political, arranged by the Vampire Council to unite our houses. Catherine had other plans. He gestured for Eleanor to follow, and she did, walking beside him through corridors that seemed to shift and change in the corner of her vision. The manor felt alive somehow, breathing with them. House Morwen has always coveted Sylvain's position, Lucien explained, his voice carrying no inflection. We control the largest territory, the richest blood tides, the strongest oaths. Catherine was meant to be a bridge between our houses. Instead, she became a spy. The ambush last night was meant to kill me, yes. And it would have succeeded if not for your warning. He stopped before a set of tall windows overlooking grounds shrouded in perpetual twilight. The question is why she chose last night specifically, and how House Morwen knew my route. Eleanor watched his reflection in the glass. He cast one. She noticed another myth dispelled. But something was wrong with it. Something she couldn't quite identify. The reflection seemed slightly delayed, moving a fraction of a second behind his actual movements. Someone inside your house is working with them, she said quietly. Yes, the word was soft, deadly. And until I discover who, this entire manor is under lockdown. No one enters. No one leaves. Eleanor's chest tightened. For how long? As long as necessary. Lucien turned to face her fully, and in the failing light, his eyes seemed to glow faintly. You're safer here than anywhere else in Ashenmoor. House Morwen will assume I'm sheltering you. They'll expect you to know things, to have value as an informant or hostage. Leaving would be suicide, so I'm a prisoner. You're a guest under my protection. His tone sharpened slightly. There's a difference. Is there? Eleanor surprised herself with her boldness. I can't leave. I'm surrounded by vampires who might want me dead. I'm dependent on you for everything. That sounds like imprisonment with better furniture. For a long moment, Lucien simply stared at her. Then something unexpected happened. His mouth curved into an almost smile. There and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. You're braver than I gave you credit for, he said. Or more foolish. I haven't decided which. He moved past her, heading toward a different corridor, and Eleanor noticed something that made her breath catch. His shadow was wrong. In the candlelight, it stretched too long, moved independently of his body for just a fraction of a second before snapping back into alignment. Come, Lucien called without turning around. If you're going to be here, you should understand the rules. Vampire law isn't forgiving to those who break it accidentally. Eleanor followed, her mind cataloging every impossible detail. The way he never seemed to blink. The way temperature dropped when he passed. The way he moved through the manor without making sound, as if gravity affected him differently. He led her to a study lined with ancient books, their spines cracked with age. A map dominated one wall, Ashenmoor and its territories, marked with symbols Eleanor didn't recognize. Lesson 1, Lucian said, his back still to her. Vampires require permission to feed. Blood taken without consent is considered assault and punishable by exile or execution. House Sylvain has maintained this law for centuries. That's not what the stories say. Most stories are written by people who've never met us. He turned, and the firelight caught his face at an angle that made him look both beautiful and terrible. Lesson 2. We cannot lie. We can omit, misdirect, or remain silent. But direct falsehoods are physically impossible for us. Eleanor processed this. So when you said I'd be safe here, I meant it absolutely. Their eyes met across the study, and Eleanor felt something shift between them, a fragile thread of understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. Then Lucian stiffened, his head tilting slightly as if listening to something beyond human hearing. His expression went cold and distant. We have a visitor, he said quietly. Someone just breached the outer wards. Eleanor's pulse spiked. House Morwen? Worse. Lucian's hand went to where his rapier should be, found nothing, and his jaw tightened. House Corvin. The Vampire Council's enforcers. They're here to investigate the ambush. He looked at Eleanor, and for the first time, she saw something like concern in those ancient eyes, and they'll want to question you. Chapter 4. The Inquisition's vampire who entered Lucian's study moved like smoke given form, silent, inevitable, impossible to grasp. She was tall and willowy, with silver-white hair that fell to her waist, and eyes the color of molten gold. Her gown was deep purple, embroidered with symbols that seemed to shift when Eleanor looked at them directly. Lucian Sylvain, she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. The council sends its regards, Magistrate Isidora. Lucian's tone was carefully neutral, but Eleanor saw the tension in his shoulders. I wasn't expecting House Corvin until tomorrow evening. The council doesn't operate on your schedule. Isidora's golden eyes swept the room, landing on Eleanor with predatory interest. And this must be the mortal who delivered the warning. How convenient. Eleanor fought the urge to step backward. The magistrate's gaze felt like being dissected, every secret exposed, every lie visible. Eleanor Thorne is under my protection, Lucian said firmly. She acted as a good citizen of Ashenmore. Nothing more. We'll determine that. Isidora glided closer to Eleanor, circling her with unsettling grace. A waitress who just happened to intercept a note meant to orchestrate your assassination. A mortal with no connections to vampire politics, who somehow recognized the urgency and acted immediately. Forgive my skepticism, Lord Sylvain, but the timing is remarkably fortunate. I didn't, Eleanor started. But Lucian cut her off with a sharp gesture. The magistrate hasn't given you permission to speak, he said quietly. Vampire law. Until she addresses you directly, silence is required. Eleanor's jaw tightened, but she obeyed. Isidora continued her inspection. Standing so close, Eleanor could feel the unnatural cold radiating from her skin. Tell me, child, Isidora said finally. What did the note say? Eleanor glanced at Lucian, who gave a barely perceptible nod. It said his fiancée had sold him out. That House Morwen knew his route and was in position. 3 blocks east. And you read this private correspondence? Why? I didn't mean to read it. I just saw it when I picked it up. The couple who left it were acting strange, nervous. They left right before Lord Sylvain arrived, like they were afraid to be there when he showed up. Isidora's expression remained unreadable. Describe them. Eleanor did, providing every detail she could remember: the woman's auburn hair, the crimson cloak, the man's house markings, their hurried whispers. As she spoke, another vampire entered the study, this one male, with sharp features and ice blue eyes. He carried a leather portfolio and began taking notes. The woman matches a description of Amarikes, the male vampire said. Known associate of House Morwen, suspected courier. And the male? Isidora asked. Unknown. But the markings Miss Thorne describes suggest a minor house. Possibly House Brennan. They've had historical ties to Morwen. Isidora turned back to Eleanor. You have a keen eye for detail. Unusual for someone who claims to be an uninvolved bystander. I worked in my family's estate before. Eleanor trailed off, old pains surfacing. Before I left, we hosted political gatherings. I learned to notice things, to read situations. It kept me safe. Something shifted in Isidora's expression, not quite sympathy, but perhaps recognition. What happened to your family? That's not relevant to this investigation, Lucian interrupted, his voice carrying an edge of warning. The two vampires locked eyes, and Eleanor felt the temperature in the room drop another 10 degrees. The air itself seemed to thicken with tension, with ancient hierarchies and barely restrained power. Everything is relevant until I say otherwise, Isadora replied coolly. The council needs to establish whether this mortal has motivations beyond civic duty, whether she's a pawn being used against you, Lucian, or something more calculated. She's neither. Lucian moved to stand beside Eleanor, a gesture of protection that didn't go unnoticed. She's a survivor who made a brave choice. Punishing her for that would violate every principle House Sylvain stands for. House Sylvain's principles are not my concern. The stability of the Vampire Council is. Isadora's golden eyes narrowed. 3 attempts on your life in as many months, Lucian. Someone wants you dead badly enough to risk open war between the houses. And now this mortal appears, perfectly positioned to either save you or complete the assassination herself. Eleanor's blood ran cold. You think I'm working with them? I think, Isadora said slowly, that you are either extraordinarily lucky or extraordinarily well placed. Either way, you represent a variable the council cannot ignore. The male vampire stepped forward. Magistrate, Lord Sylvain's blood wards show no signs of tampering. The mortal couldn't have breached them if she'd wanted to. And our sources confirm House Morwen did have hunters in position last night, exactly where the note indicated, which proves the note was accurate, Isadora conceded. Not that the mortal is innocent of ulterior motives. Eleanor felt frustration building in her chest, mixing with fear. I don't have ulterior motives. I just wanted to survive. I've spent 6 months trying to disappear, to be invisible, to forget everything I lost. The last thing I want is to be involved in vampire politics, and yet here you are, Isadora observed, in the private residence of the most powerful vampire in Ashenmoor, wearing dresses he provided, eating food from his kitchens, under his direct protection. You've become quite visible, Miss Thorne. The words hit harder than Eleanor expected, because they were true. In one night, her carefully constructed invisibility had shattered. Lucian's hand moved subtle, controlled to rest briefly on Eleanor's shoulder. The touch lasted only a second, but it steadied her. The council will allow Miss Thorne to remain here under house protection, Isadora announced. But she is not to leave Sylvain grounds without explicit permission from a council magistrate. If she attempts to flee, she'll be considered complicit in the assassination attempt and dealt with accordingly. That's house arrest, Eleanor protested. That's mercy, Isadora corrected. Be grateful Lord Sylvain values you enough to extend his protection. Many mortals in your position would already be dead. She turned to Lucian. We'll need access to your household staff for questioning. Someone provided House Morwen with your route and schedule. The traitor is close to you. Lucian's expression darkened. Granted, but the interrogations will be conducted by my people, with Corvin observers. This is still my house, for now. Isadora's smile held no warmth. The council is watching Lucian closely. 3 assassination attempts suggest weakness, and the council does not tolerate weak leadership. With that, she swept from the room, her companion following. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid. Eleanor's legs threatened to give out. She sank into the nearest chair, her hands shaking. Lucian stood motionless for a long moment, staring at the door. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle. I'm sorry you were subjected to that. Is it always like this? Eleanor asked. The politics, the interrogations, the constant suspicion. Yes. He turned to face her, and she saw weariness in his ancient eyes. Welcome to immortality, Eleanor Thorne, where trust is currency and betrayal is tradition. Chapter 5. Threads of trust. The house felt different after the council's visit, heavier, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Eleanor spent the remainder of the evening in her room, listening to distant footsteps as Lucian's staff was questioned one by one. Voices drifted through the corridors, too low to make out words. But the tension was palpable. She tried to read from the books someone had left on her nightstand, Gothic novels, ironically, but couldn't focus. Her mind kept returning to Isadora's golden eyes, to the casual way the magistrate had threatened her life, to the realization that she was now a piece on a board whose rules she didn't understand. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she called. Expecting a servant, Lucian entered, carrying a tray. He'd changed again, now wearing a dark burgundy shirt that made his pale skin seem almost luminous. The sight of him performing such a mundane task was jarring. I thought you'd be hungry, he said, setting the tray on the small table near the fire. The kitchen staff is being questioned, so I prepared this myself. Eleanor stared. You cook. I have existed for 347 years. I've learned many things. A ghost of amusement touched his features. Though I admit, the food tastes like nothing to me now. I judge quality by memory and chemistry alone. He'd brought soup rich in fragrant fresh bread, cheese, and wine. Eleanor approached cautiously, still processing the image of the vampire king, ladling soup in his own kitchen. Thank you, she said quietly. Lucien nodded and moved toward the door. Wait, the word escaped before Eleanor could stop it. He paused, turning back with one eyebrow raised. Would you stay? Just for a while? I don't want to be alone with my thoughts right now. She expected him to refuse, to cite propriety, or danger, or any number of reasonable excuses. Instead, he considered for a moment, then lowered himself into the chair opposite hers with fluid grace. Ask me anything, he said. Distraction requires conversation. Eleanor took a sip of soup. It was excellent and chose her words carefully. Earlier, you said vampires can't lie. Is that really true? Absolutely. It's a quirk of our physiology. When we're turned, something in our blood binds us to literal truth. We can withhold information, speak in riddles, or remain silent. But direct falsehoods cause physical pain. That must make politics complicated. It makes politics an art form. Lucien's fingers drummed once against the armrest, the first nervous gesture she'd seen from him. We learned to phrase everything carefully, to answer questions we weren't asked, to let others draw their own incorrect conclusions, like when Isadora asked if I was a pawn or something more calculated, and you said I was neither. You were protecting me. I was telling the truth. You're not a pawn. Pawns have no agency. And you're not calculated. You acted on instinct and compassion. His pale eyes met hers. You're something much rarer. You're genuine. The compliment landed unexpectedly, warming something in Eleanor's chest. She looked away, focusing on her food. The woman in the portrait, Catherine. How long were you engaged? A long silence followed. Eleanor thought perhaps she'd crossed a line, ventured into territory marked dangerous. But when Lucien finally spoke, his voice was quiet, reflective. 73 years. From 1774 until last autumn, he stared into the fire, his expression distant. Political marriages among vampires are measured in decades, sometimes centuries. We're patient creatures by necessity. I thought I had time to understand her, to build something resembling partnership, if not love. What happened? I discovered she'd been feeding information to House Morwen for 50 years. Troop movements, financial dealings, the locations of blood oath ceremonies, everything. His jaw tightened. She played the role of devoted fiancée flawlessly while systematically dismantling House Sylvain's security from within. Eleanor's heart ached at the carefully controlled pain in his voice. You loved her. I thought I did. Now I wonder if I loved the performance she gave, or simply the idea of not being alone. He turned to look at her, and she saw vulnerability there, raw, and quickly shuddered. Immortality is long, Eleanor. Unbearably so. You fill the years with purpose, with duty, with carefully constructed routines. But underneath, there's an emptiness that never quite goes away. The admission hung between them, intimate and dangerous. Eleanor set down her spoon, her appetite suddenly gone. I know something about emptiness, she said softly. My human fiancé was caught embezzling from his employer. He'd been doing it for years, building a fortune he planned to use to run away with his mistress. When the scandal broke, he claimed I knew about it, that I'd helped him. Lucien's eyes sharpened with interest. Had you? No, I knew nothing. But my family believed him anyway. Easier to sacrifice one daughter than face the social humiliation of admitting they'd been blind to his crimes. Eleanor felt the familiar sting of tears and blinked them back. I lost everything, my home, my reputation, my family. I came to Ashenmoor because it was the only city where no one knew my name. And now you're caught in another scandal not of your making, Lucien observed. Story of my life. Apparently, a silence fell, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The fire crackled. Rain began pattering against the windows again. It seemed to always rain in Ashenmoor. Your family were fools, Lucien said finally. You have the kind of integrity that can't be faked. I saw it the moment you handed me that note. You were terrified, but you did the right thing anyway. Eleanor's throat tightened. Thank you. And your former fiancé was an even greater fool. Anyone who would betray your trust deserves neither forgiveness nor remembrance. She laughed, the sound watery but genuine. You'd have gotten along with my grandmother. She said the same thing, right before my family cut her off for supporting me. She sounds formidable. She was. She died 3 months ago. Heart failure. Eleanor stared at her hands. I couldn't go to the funeral. My family made it clear I wasn't welcome. Lucian rose and crossed to the window, his reflection ghostly in the rain-streaked glass. Grief is difficult for vampires. We outlive everyone we know, mortals especially. You learn to hold relationships lightly, to accept their temporary nature. He paused. But it never stops hurting. The absence. 3 centuries on, and I still remember my sister's laugh. She died of fever the year after I was turned. I couldn't save her. Eleanor stood and moved to stand beside him, not touching, but close enough to offer silent companionship. Outside, the grounds of Sylvain House stretched into darkness, gardens and hedges forming labyrinth patterns only visible from above. I'm sorry, she whispered. For your sister, for Catherine's betrayal, for all of it. And I'm sorry for the family who couldn't see your worth. Lucian's voice was soft, almost tender. For the fiancé who threw away something precious. For pulling you into a war that isn't yours. Maybe it is now, Eleanor said. Maybe the moment I picked up that note, it became mine too. He turned to look at her, and something passed between them, understanding, perhaps. Recognition of kindred spirits, both betrayed, both wounded, both still fighting to survive. You should rest, Lucian said finally. Tomorrow, the real investigation begins. The council won't leave until they've identified the traitor, and the process won't be pleasant. Will they hurt people? They'll use methods that make lying impossible and truth unavoidable. It's invasive, but necessary. Eleanor nodded, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Lucian moved toward the door, then paused. Eleanor, lock your door tonight. And if you hear anything unusual, call for me. I'll hear you. Even from across this massive house? Especially from across this house. Vampire hearing is exceptional. His mouth curved slightly. And I find myself rather invested in keeping you alive. After he left, Eleanor locked the door as instructed and climbed into bed. But sleep was slow to come. She kept thinking about his words, about the loneliness in his ancient eyes, about the way they'd shared truths like precious, fragile things, and somewhere in the darkness, she heard footsteps that didn't quite sound human. Chapter 6. Blood and Secret. Eleanor woke to screaming. The sound cut through her dreams like a blade, raw, anguished, utterly inhuman. She bolted upright, heart hammering, disoriented in the darkness. The clock on the mantel read 3 in the morning. Another scream, closer this time. Then voices raised in sharp command. Eleanor threw off the covers and rushed to her door, unlocking it with shaking hands. The corridor outside was lit by flickering candles, their flames dancing wildly as if stirred by invisible wind. The temperature had dropped dramatically, her breath misted in the air. She followed the sounds to the grand hall where she'd first entered the manor. What she found there made her blood freeze. 20 of Lucian's household staff stood in a circle, their faces pale and stricken. In the center, a young woman knelt on the marble floor, convulsing. Her eyes had rolled back, showing only whites, and dark veins spider-webbed across her exposed skin like poison spreading through her system. Isadora stood over her, one pale hand pressed to the woman's forehead, golden eyes blazing with concentration. The male vampire from yesterday, Eleanor had learned his name was Dorian, held a silver bowl filled with something dark and viscous. Lucian stood apart, his face, a mask of cold fury, barely contained. What's happening? Eleanor whispered, though she wasn't sure anyone heard her. The convulsing woman let out another scream, and then words tumbled from her mouth in a voice that wasn't quite her own, deeper, rougher, layered with something ancient and malevolent. House Morwen will rise. Sylvain will fall. The blood oath is broken. The old king dies tonight. Isadora pressed harder, and the woman's back arched impossibly. Who placed the compulsion? Give me the name. Can't. Hurts. Please. The name. Isadora's voice cracked like thunder. Marcus. The tavern keeper. He's House Morwen's gateway. The woman collapsed, unconscious. Isadora withdrew her hand, her expression grim. She's been under blood compulsion for at least 6 months. Deep conditioning. She genuinely believed herself loyal to House Sylvain while carrying out Morwen's orders. Lucian's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Marcus. The name was spoken with deadly quiet. He's been serving my house for 40 years. Then he's been planning this for 40 years, Dorian said, setting down the bowl. Blood compulsion of this magnitude requires sustained contact, repeated rituals. This wasn't opportunistic, it was methodical. Eleanor's mind reeled. Marcus, the weathered tavern keeper who'd served Lucian his wine, who'd bowed with practiced deference. She'd thought him merely cautious. Instead, he'd been the spider at the center of the web. How many others? Lucian asked, his voice dangerously soft. We've found 3 so far, Isadora replied, all showing signs of long-term compulsion, all with access to your schedule, your routines, your private chambers. She turned to face the assembled staff. Line up. We're testing everyone. The next hour was brutal to witness. One by one, Lucian's household staff submitted to Isadora's examination, a process that involved her pressing both hands to their temples while Dorian monitored their vital signs with instruments Eleanor didn't recognize. Most passed through unscathed, though clearly shaken, but 2 more revealed the telltale dark veins, the convulsions, the voices that weren't their own. 5 total. 5 people whose minds had been violated, who'd been turned into unwitting weapons against the house they served. Eleanor watched Lucian's face throughout, saw the way each revelation landed like a physical blow. These were people he'd trusted, some for decades. The betrayal went deeper than Catherine's political scheming. This was personal, invasive, a corruption of everything he'd tried to build. When the last servant was tested and cleared, Isadora turned to Lucian. The 5 will need to be purged. Blood compulsion this deep leaves permanent damage. They'll never be free of it. No, Lucian's voice was steel. You'll find another way. They're victims, not traitors. There is no other way. The compulsion has rooted too deep, then it stays rooted. Lucian moved to stand between Isadora and the unconscious servants. I won't kill innocent people for the crime of being manipulated. Find a way to contain them, to ease their suffering. But they live. That's not negotiable. Isadora's golden eyes narrowed. You're allowing sentiment to compromise security. I'm allowing mercy to guide justice. There's a difference. The 2 vampires stared at each other, and Eleanor felt the weight of centuries-old hierarchies pressing down on the room. Finally, Isadora inclined her head slightly. Very well. House Corvin will arrange specialized containment, but they cannot remain on your grounds. Agreed. As Isadora moved to make arrangements, Lucian's gaze found Eleanor standing in the shadows. Something in his expression shifted softer, more vulnerable. He crossed to her in 3 long strides. You shouldn't be seeing this, he said quietly. I heard the screaming. I couldn't just stay in my room. No, I suppose you couldn't. He looked exhausted, she realized. Not physically, vampires didn't tire that way, but emotionally. Drained. 5 people. 5 lives poisoned because House Morwen wanted access to mine. Eleanor reached out before she could stop herself, her hand finding his arm. The contact sent a shock through her. His skin was cool but not cold, solid and real beneath her fingers. You're trying to save them, she said. That matters. Does it? If I'd been more careful, more vigilant, they'd never have been targeted in the first place. You can't blame yourself for someone else's cruelty. Lucian's hand covered hers, a gesture so gentle it made her breath catch. You're kind. Dangerously so. In this world, kindness is often punished. Better than the alternative. Before he could respond, Dorian approached. My lord, we've searched Marcus's quarters at the tavern. You need to see what we found. They moved to Lucian's study, where Dorian had laid out the evidence on the desk. Maps of Ashenmoor with Sylvan territories marked. Schedules detailing Lucian's movements for the past year. Letters in coded script. And most damning, a ledger listing payments from House Morwen, substantial sums, paid monthly for decades. He was their longest-running agent, Dorian explained. The tavern was positioned specifically to monitor traffic between vampire territories. Every conversation, every meeting, every careless word spoken over wine, all reported back to Morwen. Eleanor felt sick. I worked there for 6 months. He must have known. He watched me, learned my routine. Which makes you the perfect pawn, Isadora said, entering the study. Morwen has been building to this for years. The ambush wasn't meant to kill Lucian outright, it was meant to force him into a position where he'd have to reveal his defenses, his allies, his weaknesses, and I led him right into it, Eleanor whispered. No, Lucian's voice was firm. You disrupted their plan. You gave me warning when I should have had none. Whatever they intended, you complicated it. But now they know about me. Know I'm here, under your protection. What if an explosion shook the manor? The windows shattered inward, spraying glass across the study. Eleanor felt Lucien's arms wrap around her, pulling her down as the ceiling cracked above them. Shouts erupted from throughout the house. The acrid smell of smoke filled the air. They're here, Isadora hissed, her eyes blazing gold. House Morwen is attacking Sylvain grounds. This is open war. Lucien released Eleanor and drew his rapier in one fluid motion. His face had gone utterly cold, all traces of vulnerability erased. Get to the vault, he commanded, looking at Eleanor. Dorian will take you. Don't leave until I come for you. But go, now. Another explosion rocked the manor. Through the broken windows, Eleanor saw figures moving in the darkness, dozens of them, too fast to be human, their eyes glowing in the firelight. House Morwen had come for blood. Chapter 7. The siege. Dorian grabbed Eleanor's arm and pulled her toward a hidden door behind a tapestry depicting ancient battles. The manor shook again, closer this time, the sound of stone cracking under supernatural force. This way, Dorian urged, leading her down a narrow stone staircase that spiraled into darkness. Behind them, she heard Lucien shouting orders, the clash of steel and human shrieks that made her blood run cold. They descended 3 levels before reaching a heavy iron door. Dorian pressed his palm against it, and Eleanor heard mechanisms click and whir. The door swung open to reveal a vault carved from bedrock, shelves lined with ancient books, weapons, and artifacts that glowed with strange light. Stay here, Dorian commanded. The wards on this room will hold against anything short of. A scream cut through the air. Young, terrified human. Eleanor's head snapped toward the sound. Who was that? The kitchen staff. They were still upstairs. Dorian's face paled. I have to go back. Then go. I'll be fine. He hesitated, clearly torn between duty to Lucien and the screams echoing from above. Eleanor made the decision for him, pushing him toward the door. Go. I'll lock this behind you. Dorian vanished up the stairs. Eleanor closed the vault door and heard the mechanisms engage. She was alone in the silence, surrounded by centuries of Sylvain history, while above her, people were dying. She couldn't just hide. Eleanor surveyed the vault, her mind racing. The walls were lined with weapons, swords, crossbows, strange instruments she didn't recognize. On one shelf sat leather-bound journals, their pages filled with careful script. She grabbed one at random, flipping through. Blood oath protocols, 1-6-3. She skimmed faster. Information about vampire hierarchies, weaknesses, the ways houses maintain power. And there a section on territorial wards. The magical barriers that protected vampire grounds from invasion. Wards draw power from the ruling bloodline. Disruption requires either the lord's death or corruption of the anchor points. Physical locations where ward energy converges. Eleanor's breath caught. If House Morwen was attacking despite the wards, they must have found a way to corrupt the anchor points, which meant Lucien was fighting blind, defending a perimeter that was already compromised. She needed to tell him. Eleanor grabbed a crossbow from the wall. It was heavier than she expected, but manageable, and loaded a bolt from the quiver beside it. The journal went into her pocket. She took a deep breath, pressed her palm to the door the way she'd seen Dorian do, and prayed. Nothing happened, of course. The wards recognized vampire blood, not human. Eleanor looked down at her hand, at the crossbow bolt, and made a decision that would have terrified her yesterday. She pressed the bolt's tip to her palm and drew blood, not deep, just enough to well red against her skin. She smeared it on the door and tried again. The mechanisms clicked. The door opened. Apparently, any blood worked in a crisis. Eleanor climbed the stairs, crossbow ready, following the sounds of battle. The manor was chaos. Fires burned in several rooms, smoke thick in the air. She passed 2 vampires locked in combat, moving too fast for her eyes to track. One crashed through a wall, the other following. She crept through corridors she was beginning to know, heading toward the main hall, where the fighting sounded heaviest. A figure lunged from a doorway, and Eleanor's finger found the trigger instinctively. The crossbow bolt took the vampire in the shoulder. He howled and staggered back. Eleanor ran. The main hall was carnage. At least 30 vampires fought in a swirling melee. Sylvain Black versus Morwen Crimson. Bodies lay scattered across the marble, some still moving, others horrifyingly still. The grand chandelier had fallen, its crystals mixing with blood and broken glass, and there, in the center, Lucian fought like death incarnate. His rapier was a blur, precise and deadly. Eleanor watched him dispatch 3 Morwen vampires in seconds, his movements economical and brutal. But he was surrounded, outnumbered. Even as she watched, a blade scored his side and dark blood stained his shirt. Eleanor's gaze swept the hall, looking for anything she could use. Then she saw it, the chandelier's chains, still attached to the ceiling mechanism. If she could release them, drop the remaining weight onto the Morwen forces clustered beneath, she ran toward the wall where the pulley system was housed, keeping low, dodging between combatants. A Morwen vampire noticed her and lunged. Eleanor didn't think, just raised the crossbow and fired. The bolt caught him in the throat, and he went down gurgling. She reached the pulley. The mechanism was old but simple, a lever system locked in place. Eleanor grabbed it and pulled with all her strength. Nothing. She braced her foot against the wall and pulled harder. The lever groaned, shifted. With a shriek of protesting metal, it gave way. The remaining chandelier chains released. Hundreds of pounds of wrought iron and crystal plummeted directly onto the clustered Morwen forces. The crash was deafening. Vampires scattered, but 4 weren't fast enough. The chandelier crushed them, and their screams cut short. Lucian's eyes found Eleanor across the hall, and she saw shock flash across his features. Then something else, pride maybe, or terror that she was exposed. A Morwen vampire broke from the fighting and charged toward her. Eleanor fumbled to reload the crossbow, knowing she wouldn't be fast enough. The vampire was 10 feet away, then 5. Moving with impossible speed, Lucian appeared between them like a shadow made solid. His rapier took the Morwen vampire through the heart in one smooth thrust. As the body fell, Lucian grabbed Eleanor and pulled her behind the overturned table. "What are you doing here?" His voice was harsh with fear. "You were supposed to stay in the vault." "The wards are compromised," Eleanor gasped. "I found a journal. The anchor points have been corrupted." "That's how they got through." Lucian's expression shifted, understanding dawning. "The anchor points are in the gardens. 4 cardinal directions. If Morwen corrupted them, you're fighting a battle you can't win. The wards won't hold." He looked at her, and something passed between them, trust, respect, the recognition that she'd risked everything to bring him information he desperately needed. "Isadora." Lucian's shout cut through the battle. The magistrate appeared at his side, her white hair matted with blood. "The anchor points are compromised. We need to fall back to the inner sanctum and re-establish the wards from there. That will take hours." "We don't have." Isadora snapped. "Then we make the hours." Lucian turned to the remaining Sylvain forces. "Fighting. Retreat. Inner sanctum. Now." The Sylvain vampires moved as one, coordinated and disciplined. They fought their way toward the eastern wing, protecting their wounded, leaving Morwen to claim the outer halls. Eleanor ran with them, Lucian's hand on her back, guiding her through smoke and chaos. They reached a reinforced doorway, and Sylvain forces poured through. Lucian was last, pulling Eleanor with him just as a Morwen blade whistled past her head. The door slammed shut. Lucian drew his hand across it, and Eleanor saw his blood seal the entrance, glowing briefly before fading. They were in a circular chamber, smaller, more defensible. About 20 Sylvain vampires remained standing, half of them wounded. The losses had been catastrophic. Lucian turned to Eleanor, his hands finding her shoulders. "You shouldn't have left the vault. You could have been killed. So could you. And I couldn't just hide while people died." His jaw tightened. Then, unexpectedly, he pulled her into his arms. The embrace lasted only seconds, but Eleanor felt the tension in his body, the fear he wouldn't voice. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "For the warning. For your courage." Dorian appeared, supporting 2 injured vampires. "My lord, Morwen forces are regrouping. They'll breach this door within the hour." Lucian released Eleanor, his expression hardening. "Then we use that hour wisely. Isadora, can you re-establish wards from here?" "Temporarily. But without the anchor points, they'll be weak. Weak is better than nothing." He looked around the chamber at his battered, exhausted forces. "We hold until dawn. Morwen, vampires can't fight in daylight. It'll force them to retreat. That's 4 hours away," Dorian said quietly. "Then we fight for 4 hours." Eleanor looked at the sealed door, hearing movement on the other side. Scratching, testing. House. Morwen was coming. And dawn felt impossibly far away. Lucian's hand found hers in the darkness, his cool fingers threading through her warm ones. "Stay close to me," he murmured. "Whatever happens, stay close." Eleanor squeezed his hand, feeling the slight tremor in his grip, the first crack in his controlled facade. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised. Outside the door, something heavy slammed against it. The siege had only just begun. Chapter 8. The fallout dawn came like salvation. Eleanor felt it before she saw it, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a relaxing of the terrible pressure that had filled the sanctum for hours. The pounding on the door had ceased 20 minutes ago, replaced by retreating footsteps and angry voices fading into silence. Lucien stood at the single narrow window, watching the sky lighten from black to charcoal to pearl gray. His shirt was torn and blood-stained, his face haggard in the growing light. He hadn't moved in 10 minutes, just stood there, rigid and silent. Around the chamber, the surviving Sylvain vampires tended their wounds. Vampire healing was fast, but not instantaneous. The deeper injuries would take hours to close. 3 hadn't made it through the night. Their bodies lay covered by dark cloth in the corner, awaiting proper rites. Eleanor sat against the wall, exhausted beyond measure. Her hands still shook from adrenaline, her palm throbbed where she'd cut it, and her dress was ruined with smoke and blood. Some hers, most not. "They've withdrawn," Isadora announced, lowering her hands from where she'd been maintaining the temporary ward. The golden glow around the door faded. "Morwen forces have retreated beyond Sylvain territory. For now." "Casualties?" Lucien's voice was flat and motionless. 3 dead, 7 severely wounded. "The outer manor is destroyed. They set fires in at least 8 rooms before we forced them back." Isadora's expression was grim. "This was a coordinated assault, Lucien. Not just Morwen. We identified House Brennan fighters and at least 2 from House Vex, a coalition." Lucien's hands clenched on the windowsill. "They're uniting against Sylvain. Against you specifically," Dorian corrected quietly. "This wasn't about territory or politics. They wanted you dead." Silence fell, heavy with implication. The council had warned that weakness wouldn't be tolerated. 3 assassination attempts had suggested vulnerability. Now, an open assault on Sylvain grounds, a coalition of rival houses, bodies of his people lying cold in the corner. It all pointed to one conclusion: Lucien Sylvain was losing his grip on power. "The council will convene an emergency session," Isadora said. "You'll need to present a defense, explain how this happened, prove you can still maintain control of your territory." "Or?" Eleanor asked, though she dreaded the answer. Isadora's golden eyes settled on her. "Or the council will vote to replace him, strip his title, dissolve House Sylvain's holdings, redistribute power among the other houses." She paused. "And execute him for incompetence." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "That's insane. He defended his home against impossible odds. He allowed his home to be breached in the first place." Isadora interrupted. "Vampire law is absolute. The strong rule. The weak are culled. That's how we've survived for millennia." Lucien turned from the window, his face an emotionless mask. "When does the council convene?" 3 nights. "The other magistrates are already en route to Ashenmoor." Isadora moved toward the door. "I suggest you spend that time preparing your case and deciding what you're willing to sacrifice to maintain your position." She left, taking most of the Sylvain vampires with her to secure the damaged sections of the manor. Only Dorian remained, and after a glance at Lucien's face, he quietly excused himself. Eleanor and Lucien were alone. For a long moment, neither spoke. Eleanor watched him standing there, this ancient, powerful being, who suddenly looked utterly defeated. The carefully maintained control had cracked, and underneath she saw exhaustion, grief, and something that looked dangerously like despair. "You should rest," Eleanor said softly. "I don't need rest. I need answers. I need to understand how everything I've built over 3 centuries collapsed in a single night." "It didn't collapse. You're still standing. Your people are still loyal. My people are dead." The words exploded from him with such force Eleanor flinched. Lucien's control shattered completely. 3 of them, gone. Because I was too blind to see the threat, too trusting to properly vet my own household, too weak to protect what was mine. He turned away, his shoulders rigid. Eleanor could see him fighting to rebuild his composure, brick by careful brick. She stood and crossed to him, ignoring every instinct that screamed caution. When she was close enough to feel the unnatural cold radiating from his skin, she stopped. "Look at me," she said. Lucien didn't move. "Please." Slowly, he turned. His eyes were completely black, not gray, not storm-colored, but utterly dark. She'd never seen them like this. It should have terrified her, Instead, she reached up and touched his face. Lucien went absolutely still. His skin was cool beneath her palm, smooth and perfect and utterly inhuman. She felt him stop breathing, an unnecessary habit for vampires, but one he maintained. Felt the way he trembled, barely perceptible, at the contact. "You did everything you could," Eleanor whispered. "You saved as many as possible. You fought when you could have fled. You protected people who were already compromised, when killing them would have been easier. That's not weakness, Lucien. That's strength. The council won't see it that way. Then the council is wrong." His hand came up to cover hers, pressing her palm more firmly against his cheek. "You shouldn't be here. Shouldn't be risking yourself for a war that's not yours. I should send you away, somewhere safe, before the council session." "Don't." The word came out fiercer than Eleanor intended. "Don't send me away. Don't decide what's best for me without asking what I want. And what do you want?" His voice was raw, vulnerable in a way she'd never heard. Eleanor's heart hammered. She was standing inches from a vampire who could kill her without effort, touching him with casual intimacy that should be impossible, feeling things she had no right to feel. "I want to help you," she said. "I want to stand beside you when the council convenes. I want—" She couldn't finish. Couldn't voice the truth burning in her chest, that somewhere between terror and trust, between forced proximity and shared secrets, she'd started to care for him. This wounded, dangerous, impossibly lonely creature who'd protected her when he had every reason not to. Lucien's other hand rose to cup her face, his touch achingly gentle. "You deserve better than this. Better than me. A normal life, with sunlight and safety and someone who can grow old beside you. I had that life planned. It was built on lies." Eleanor's voice shook. "This, whatever this is, it's real. Terrifying and complicated, and probably doomed, but real." For a heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her. Saw the longing flash across his features, the way his gaze dropped to her mouth. The air between them felt electric, charged with possibility. Then he stepped back, breaking contact, and the moment shattered. "You need rest," he said, his voice carefully controlled again. "Real rest. In a real bed. I'll have Dorian prepare rooms in the undamaged wing." Eleanor wanted to protest, to push past the walls he was rebuilding. But exhaustion crashed over her in waves, and she recognized dismissal when she heard it. "Will you rest too?" she asked. Eventually, he turned back to the window, to the morning light he could observe, but never truly enjoy. "First, I have 3 funerals to arrange, and a defense to prepare that will probably prove inadequate." Eleanor moved toward the door, then paused. "Lucien, you're not weak, and you're not alone. Remember that." She left before he could respond. Before she could see whether her words landed or bounced off the armor he wore, but as she climbed the stairs toward the undamaged sections of the manor, she heard something that made her pause, a sound that might have been a sob, quickly stifled, the Vampire King weeping in the growing dawn. Chapter 9. Lessons in the Dark. Leaner slept through most of the day, waking as twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and rose. Someone had left fresh clothes, a simple dress in deep green, and a tray of food that was somehow still warm. She ate mechanically, her mind replaying the battle. Lucien's broken expression, the way he'd trembled at her touch. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Lucien entered, looking more composed than he had at dawn. He'd changed into clean clothes, black trousers, and a charcoal shirt that made his pale skin luminous. His wounds had healed, leaving no trace of the battle except a weariness in his eyes. "I hope you rested well," he said formally, as if they hadn't stood inches apart this morning, as if she hadn't felt him shake beneath her hand. "Well enough." Eleanor set down her tea. "How are your people?" "The wounded are healing. The dead have been honored." His jaw tightened briefly. "And the council has sent word. The session will be held tomorrow night instead of 3 nights from now. They've moved up the timeline." "Why?" "Because news of the attack has spread. Other houses are watching to see if Sylvain falls. The council wants to resolve this quickly, before the situation destabilizes further." He moved to the window. A habit she was learning meant he needed distance. "I came to ask if you'd join me this evening. There are things you should understand about vampire law before you appear before the council." "You still want me there?" "You're a witness to the attack, and," he paused, choosing words carefully, "your presence matters to me. But only if you're willing." Eleanor stood, smoothing her dress. "Teach me what I need to know." Relief flickered across his features. He offered his arm with old-fashioned formality, and she took it. Feeling the cool strength beneath the fabric, Lucian led her through the manor to a library she hadn't seen before, a vast circular room with books lining walls that stretched up 3 stories. A spiral staircase wound to the upper levels, and comfortable chairs clustered near a fireplace where flames danced without wood. "This is beautiful," Eleanor breathed. "It's my favorite room in the house." Lucian guided her to a chair near the fire, then settled into the one opposite. "My sister loved books. After she died, I collected them obsessively. Anything she might have enjoyed. It became," he gestured vaguely, "a monument to her, I suppose." Eleanor heard the grief beneath his words. "What was her name?" "Marguerite. She was 17 when the fever took her. Brilliant, stubborn, endlessly curious." A faint smile touched his lips. "She would have interrogated you mercilessly, demanded your entire life story, then declared you her new best friend within an hour. She sounds wonderful." "She was." Lucian was quiet for a moment, lost in memory. Then he straightened, focusing. "But we're here to discuss the council. What do you know about vampire governance?" "Almost nothing beyond what I've observed." "Then let me educate you." He leaned forward, his expression intent. "The Vampire Council consists of 7 magistrates, each representing one of the great houses. They enforce the ancient laws, mediate disputes, and have absolute authority to execute any vampire who threatens our collective survival." "That's terrifying." "It's necessary. We're predators, Eleanor. Without strict laws, we'd destroy ourselves and expose our existence to humanity." His pale eyes held hers. "The council operates on 3 fundamental principles: strength, stability, and secrecy. Any vampire who demonstrates weakness, creates instability, or risks exposure is eliminated." Eleanor's stomach nodded. "And they think you've demonstrated weakness. 3 assassination attempts. A compromised household. An open assault on my territory." "Yes, they think I've become a liability." He said it matter-of-factly, but she heard the fear underneath. "What will they ask me?" "Everything. How you came to work at the tavern. Why you gave me the note. What you observed during the attack. They'll be looking for inconsistencies, for proof you're somehow complicit." He paused. "And they'll ask about our relationship." Heat crept up Eleanor's neck. "Our? What relationship? I'm a human you're protecting. Are you?" Lucian's voice was soft, dangerous. "Because the way I touched you this morning, the way you looked at me, that wasn't simple protection, Eleanor. And the council will sense it. They're ancient, perceptive. They'll see what's developing between us." "And what is developing?" She needed to hear him say it. Lucian stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "Something inadvisable. Something that complicates everything. You're mortal. I'm not. You deserve a life in daylight. I exist in shadow. The council will see you as either a weakness to exploit or a distraction. That proves I'm unfit to lead. So what do? We lie." He turned to face her. "Not directly, I told you. Vampires can't lie. But we present the truth in ways that minimize what they'll perceive as vulnerability. You're a witness. I'm protecting. Nothing more. No emotional attachment. No personal interest beyond duty." Eleanor's chest ached. "Is that what you want? For it to be nothing more?" "What I want is irrelevant." His voice was harsh. "I want you safe. I want you alive. And that means keeping distance between us, at least publicly." She stood, crossing to him with deliberate steps. "And privately?" Lucian watched her approach like she was something wild and unpredictable. When she stopped directly in front of him, she saw his control fracturing again. Saw the hunger in his eyes, not for blood, but for connection, for touch. For something he'd denied himself for too long. "Privately," he whispered. "I want things I have no right to want." Eleanor reached up, her fingers finding the collar of his shirt. She felt his sharp intake of breath, unnecessary but instinctive. "Like what?" she challenged. His hand caught her wrist, gentle but firm. "Don't, please. I'm trying very hard to be honorable here. Maybe I don't want honor. Maybe I want honesty. The honest truth." Lucian's thumb stroked the inside of her wrist, finding her pulse. "I think about the warmth of your skin, the sound of your heartbeat, the way you look at me without fear, like I'm not a monster. I think about what it would be like to." He stopped, his jaw clenching. "But I can't, because you deserve choice, not coercion. And proximity to me, dependence on my protection that compromises your ability to choose freely." Eleanor's heart hammered. She understood what he was saying, the care behind his restraint. But it didn't stop the longing that burned in her chest. when this is over, she said quietly, when the council has made their decision and I'm no longer dependent on you, ask me then. Ask me what I want, and I'll tell you honestly. Lucien's eyes darkened. And if the council decides against me, if I'm executed, then I'll grieve you. Her voice broke. I'll mourn the possibility of what we might have been. He pulled her close suddenly, his arms wrapping around her, his face buried in her hair. She felt him shaking, felt the desperate way he held her, like she was the only solid thing in a world dissolving. I don't deserve you, he whispered against her temple. Stop deciding what you deserve and just accept what's offered. They stood like that for long minutes, wrapped in each other, pretending the morning wouldn't come, pretending the council wouldn't judge, pretending they had time. Finally, Lucien released her, stepping back with visible effort. We should continue your education, he said, his voice rough. There's more you need to know about council procedures, about how to answer their questions. They spent the next hours reviewing vampire law, practicing responses, preparing for the Inquisition. But beneath every word, every careful instruction, ran a current of unspoken longing, and when Eleanor finally returned to her room near dawn, she found a single white rose on her pillow, a flower that shouldn't bloom in winter, in a house without gardens. No note, just the flower, perfect and impossible, like everything developing between them. Chapter 10. The council's judgment. The council chamber was carved from black stone deep beneath Ashenmoor's oldest district. Eleanor descended the spiral stairs with Lucien, their footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. Torches lined the walls, their flames burning blue-white and casting no warmth. 7 thrones dominated the circular chamber, arranged in a semicircle. 6 were already occupied. Eleanor recognized Isadora in the center throne, her white hair gleaming like frost. The other magistrates were equally striking, a woman with obsidian skin and eyes like burning coals, a man whose face seemed to shift between ages, another whose presence made the air itself feel heavy. Each represented centuries of accumulated power, ancient, merciless, absolute. Lucien guided Eleanor to a simple wooden chair set before the thrones, then took his place standing beside her. He wore formal attire, a black coat with silver threading, his house sigil prominent on the lapel. His face was an emotionless mask, but Eleanor felt the tension radiating from him. The Council of 7 convenes, Isadora announced, her voice resonating through the chamber. We gather to address the crisis of House Sylvain. Lord Lucien Sylvain, you stand accused of criminal negligence, failure to protect your territory, and demonstrating weakness that threatens the stability of all vampire kind. Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap. The charges were brutal, designed to strip away any defense. How do you answer? Isadora continued. I accept responsibility for the breach, Lucien said, his voice steady. But I contest the charge of weakness. House Morwen's attack required coordination between 3 houses, 40 years of planning, and the corruption of 5 members of my household through blood compulsion. No lord could have prevented such a coordinated assault. The magistrate, with shifting features, leaned forward. Yet other lords have maintained security despite similar threats. What makes you special, Sylvain? Nothing. Which is precisely why I'm being targeted. House Morwen doesn't want my territory, they want to prove the council's current leadership is vulnerable. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Eleanor saw several magistrates exchange glances. Bold accusation, the woman with coal-fire eyes said. You suggest this attack was political theater? I suggest, Lucien replied carefully, that my downfall serves multiple purposes. It weakens Sylvain, strengthens Morwen's coalition, and creates the perception that the council cannot protect its own members, and the mortal. Another magistrate spoke, an elderly-looking vampire with a voice like grinding stone. Explain her involvement. All eyes turned to Eleanor. She felt the weight of their attention, like physical pressure, crushing down on her shoulders. Eleanor Thorne intercepted intelligence meant to facilitate my assassination, Lucien said. She warned me at great personal risk. Without her intervention, I would be dead. Convenient, the shifting-faced magistrate observed. A mortal witness to your heroism, dependent on your protection, perfectly positioned to testify in your favor. Eleanor's temper flared. I'm not testifying in anyone's favor. I'm telling the truth. Silence fell. She'd broken protocol, spoken without being addressed directly. Lucien's hand found her shoulder in warning, but Isadora's lips curved slightly. The mortal has spirit. Very well. Miss Thorne. Tell us your truth. Why did you give Lucian that note? Eleanor took a breath, choosing her words carefully the way Lucian had taught her. Because watching someone walk into an ambush without warning felt like murder. I may not understand your politics or your laws, but I understand right and wrong, and you expect nothing in return for this noble gesture? The question was a trap. Eleanor felt it, saw the calculation in Isadora's golden eyes. I expected to be left alone, Eleanor said honestly. I came to Ashenmoor to disappear, to escape a scandal that destroyed my former life. The last thing I wanted was involvement in vampire politics, yet here you are, residing in Lord Sylvain's manor, wearing dresses he provided, under his direct protection. The coal-eyed magistrate's voice was sharp. One might conclude you've found a new patron, perhaps even become his blood servant. I'm not his anything, Eleanor said firmly. I'm a human who made a choice and is dealing with the consequences. What choice? Isadora pressed. Eleanor met her gaze. To care what happened to him. To refuse to be invisible when someone's life was in danger. To act like human decency still matters, even in your immortal world. The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor felt Lucian's hand tighten on her shoulder, warning or pride. She couldn't tell. Human decency, the elderly magistrate repeated slowly. Interesting concept from a species that historically hunted us with torches and stakes. We're not having that debate, Isadora interjected. The question before this council is simple. Has Lord Sylvain demonstrated such weakness that he's unfit to lead House Sylvain? The evidence suggests yes, shifting face said. Compromised household, breached territory, coalition forming against him. These are signs of a failing lord, or signs of a lord facing unprecedented assault. Another magistrate countered, a woman Eleanor hadn't heard speak before, with silver markings on her dark skin. House Morwen's tactics were sophisticated. They targeted Sylvain specifically because he's been effective, not because he's weak. The debate continued, magistrates arguing back and forth. Eleanor listened, her heart sinking as she realized the council was genuinely divided. This could go either way. Finally, Isadora raised her hand for silence. Lord Sylvain, the council requires a demonstration of strength. Proof you can still lead, still protect your house and territory. Her eyes were cold, calculating. We propose a blood trial. Face, a champion from House Morwen in single combat. Victory proves your worthiness. Defeat results in immediate execution and dissolution of House Sylvain. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. That's insane. He's already wounded from defending his home. The trial would be held 1 week from tonight, Isadora continued, ignoring her. Sufficient time to heal and prepare. Do you accept, Lord Sylvain? Lucian was quiet for a long moment. Eleanor could see him calculating odds, weighing options. Finally, he spoke. I accept. On one condition. You're hardly in a position to negotiate, Colai said. Nevertheless, Lucian's voice was steel. Miss Thorne is released from house arrest immediately. She's free to leave Ashenmoor, to return to her life, without fear of reprisal from any house. This is sworn before the council as a binding oath. Why? Isadora asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Because she deserves freedom. She's been trapped in consequences of my political situation long enough. Eleanor stood, turning to face him. No, absolutely not. I'm not leaving. You have no choice. Lucian's eyes met hers, and she saw anguish there, carefully hidden but visible to her now. The council has granted my request. You're free. Lucian, it's done. Isadora stood, and the other magistrates followed. Very well. 1 week from tonight, Lord Sylvain faces House Morwen's champion. Miss Thorne is released from all obligations and protections. She looked at Eleanor. You should leave Ashenmoor. What happens next is not for mortal eyes. The magistrates filed out, leaving Eleanor and Lucian alone in the chamber. She grabbed his arm. You're sending me away. After everything, I'm setting you free. His voice was gentle but final. You warned me about this war, Eleanor. You've done more than enough. Now go, live, find happiness somewhere far from here. And if you die in this trial, then you will grieve, as you said. And eventually, you'll heal. He touched her face one last time, his cool fingers trembling. Thank you for reminding me what hope feels like. Even if only briefly, he walked away, his footsteps echoing in the empty chamber, and Eleanor stood alone, watching him disappear into shadow, her heart breaking with every step he took.